All right. So I so I just started this impromptu hangout discussing the soul, its connotation in Christian points of view, not to mention viewpoints surrounding what the nature of the soul is, its ontology, if you will, and or its ontos, and specifically everyone else's viewpoints on what the soul is, if it can be, or what it is classified as. I'll start this off by kind of differentiating um, what the soul is and what the mind is, because we kind of tend to view these things as overlapping, but soul just means that which animates, or that which is animating the body in the historical Greek origin context. So the soul could be a totally so that's where we're going with those properties. The soul could be, in theory, have a material background, completely material, and thus the soul. And this is why usually a lot of people were bashed for saying that they believe that the soul dies, because they believed it was in a sense one with the body, and it would die when the body dies and come back when the body comes back. Um,
So okay. So basically, what you're saying is that if the soul is completely physical, it can still survive.
in theory, yes, with the resurrection.
Okay.
Um, but you'd have to argue against kind of like teleportation thought experiments. And of course, the soul isn't always equivocated with the mind. The mind is that which makes us think or react. The soul is only equivocated with the mind through Cartesian kind of dualism that was prevalent at the time of Descartes, which was stepping away from the Aristotelian background it once had. So the soul and the mind were united, and that mind slash soul was later immaterial. But
So how would that work in idealism? Like, would you say that the soul and the mind are united in idealism, or?
idealism, especially like Berkeley, the Berkeleyan variety or the monistic variety, there is no distinction between the soul and the mind and the body. It's just all mind.
You know, this is not really on the topic of idealism, but I thought it was interesting. You mentioned that soul, soul and mind sort of thing comes from a Greek background. Do you know where the word psychology comes from?
Well, chances are, if it's Latin, if I can guess.
Well, actually, it comes from the Greek word psyche,
Oh,
um, and you upsilon in Greek is normally translated as y. But what's interesting is that psyche actually means like the soul, but we sort of interpreted that as meaning the mind in our more modern view of philosophy, and that's how we got psychology. I just wanted to say that because I wanted to get that off my chest. Continue.
no, it's cool historical background or information. So there are going to be more people joining in, but right now I have Jerez, animating Rebel, Will, and of course Yoda Chewbacca, who's also known as on his other channel, The Realistic Nihilist. Although he's promised to change his name to the Empirical Nihilist, or sorry, the Empirical. Um, you had a joke about that with Bible Thumbing Wingnut and Sai on his hangout. I'm butchering it right now, but maybe you could tell. Oh, the Realistic Evidentialist. Thanks. That's it on group chat. So one by one, starting on my own left with animating Rebel, and then going onwards. Care to share your kind of position on the mind-body problem?
Who will start?
You.
Oh, okay. Idealist,
Okay, and Therese?
pretty much.
Okay, I'm actually sort of sitting on the fence between idealism and substance dualism. I'm actually leaning more towards substance dualism.
Okay. Will?
Um, I guess I'm still partially deciding, but mostly I'm an Aristotelian kind of, or a Thomist in this area. I believe that the soul is the form of the body.
Okay, hylomorphic dualism.
Yeah.
Or hylomorphism. Yoda, any position?
I think the mind is normative and that the body is not.
What?
Can you expand on that a bit?
I think that the mind has intentional states, and that I lean towards intentional realism, and intentionality has normative properties, so you sort of can't appeal to anything like you can't appeal to material to explain the mind.
Um, so is this like a form of non-reductivist physicalism, or
No, I don't know. I don't know. I'm not really familiar with non-reductive physicalism, but I don't subscribe to physicalism.
Would you say that's a form of property dualism? Since you were saying that the mind has properties which are not shared by the material body?
I guess maybe it could be construed that way.
yeah.
Or
I
do
take
you lean towards transcendental idealism?
well, I identify as a transcendental idealist, but not because of the mind. That's more of
Oh.
Panpsychism.
panpsychism. Yeah, that's a weird position. I don't know about that.
All right.
My philosophy of mind is like the weakest area of philosophy for me. So
No worries. It's actually one that I want to do more exploring in myself. So it's actually pretty interesting.
It's
Also,
not exactly my strong point either.
Jack and Randy, I think they actually have an interesting position from intentional realism against the existence of God. Which is also an interesting question, but
I could argue that. I know that argument. I could argue that.
actually, I was just kind of interested since there's Jack.
Hi, Jack.
Since we were just going over our positions on mind, how do you construe the division of? Sorry for such a loaded question, but how do you construe the division between mind and body?
Who is this question directed to?
Jack.
Oh.
Still setting up.
What was the question?
Oh, hey Jack. I was just asking, what's your view on the whole mind-body problem? What's your kind of philosophy on mind? In one word, or a bit more if you need to expand on it.
Well, I don't really think that either idealism or materialism or dualism, I don't think any of those views are coherent.
All right. So tritheism.
I'm sorry?
So tritheism?
No, I don't think it. I don't look at it that way.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't necessarily have a specific position. I just have a set of positions I reject.
So there's nothing you accept, but there are things you reject then.
So you're like an atheist for the philosophy of the mind.
Well, I mean, I'm an atheist about specific views in philosophy of mind, but I don't necessarily, have a preferred view myself. But there are certain views that I think are clearly wrong.
So is there any view you think is sort of plausible at all?
Well, I think it's a tricky issue because you have to really distinguish between two different properties of mind, qualitative states and intentional states, and I'm not sure whether that we would have to think about them both the same way.
All right, cool. Yoda was actually discussing his view, which is that intentional states cannot be reduced down to physical states. Would you agree with that much?
Yes.
Okay. So why would?
So that's so let me just clarify. Is that are you saying that the mind has an irreducible property?
Oh, I think both qualitative and intentional states are irreducible to the material.
Okay.
All right, cool. So, put that out of the way. The next thing to discuss is since we all seem here to reject physicalism, or at least maybe a reductive physicalism, or even an eliminative kind of materialism. Would anyone like to give reasons to why they hold that, why they don't hold to that specific position?
Because I have another position that I like.
Okay.
I personally reject it because I think a completely material mind is incoherent because I think functionalism is incoherent and eliminative materialism is also it's just it's so implausible to me that we're not conscious that I think I just reject it based on that reason.
I mean, I think that it is possible. It's not completely incoherent that the mind has a basis in the material world, but I don't think that one can say that that the mind itself or every aspect of it is immaterial.
Jack, Yoda.
I'm sorry, what's the question?
Oh, this question is why, since everyone here seems to reject reductive and or eliminative materialism, I was just going to ask why is that a position that's rejected?
I don't even understand what it means really to say that qualitative states can be described in purely physical terms. But there just seems to be a misunderstanding of what it means for one to have first-person experience.
Usually, eliminativists might say these terms that you're using are essentially like pop psychology, that kind of thing. That if you were actually to describe your actions like the Churchlands would in terms of just your neurons firing, then of course it would make a lot more sense.
Yeah, but you can't really describe qualitative states through neural firing. There is such a gap there's such an explanatory gap between, for example, how neurons work, like action potentials, synapses firing, and what it feels like to experience qualitative states. That I think it's just neural states do not explain anything about mental states.
I think that I would say that qualia are not like physical or material. And while I don't normally really base much off of that because I feel like I'm sort of convinced by a sort of naturalist, not convinced as in I would agree with it. I'm just saying I would be convinced in saying I can't really argue against this position that qualia can still have a natural basis. But I would definitely say that qualia can't be said to be based purely off, or I guess it can't be said to be the reaction from synapses in your brain or chemical reactions in your brain.
All right.
Jack,
Sorry.
I have a question for Jack.
All right.
Yeah.
Because like maybe there's this idea that you can't sort of explain your own mind in terms of purely physical states, but maybe like is there a way that you could give sort of like a P-zombie account for everyone else's actions? Like to say that they don't have qualitative states. Like if you have a robot or something, right, and you program this robot to do such and such, there's a way to account for that on purely physical like terms, right? You can say that okay, whatever this robot is doing, he's programmed to do. He doesn't have any intentions. He's just reacting in terms of dispositions. Is there a way to appeal to other minds? Is there a way to argue that everyone else is just a P-zombie, that everyone else's mind is just sort of a set of reactions?
Yeah, I don't think there can be evidence for the mentality of other beings. So I think we just attribute it. So it's essentially a basic belief. I think the evidence is the same either way.
Personally, I don't think that's a properly basic belief because it seems so implausible that other people are not conscious.
Well, I don't know what you mean by properly basic. I didn't use that term.
Oh, okay.
I just said a basic. I said a basic belief, to which I mean that it's not justified in terms of anything further, such as evidence. Right? You can't actually appeal to evidence in order to validate, because the evidence would be the same for both a P-zombie and a mind being. So I don't think that I don't think there's any way really to argue for it. I think it's just something that's assumed.
I don't think the evidence is necessarily the same for like people who are not conscious don't act the same way as people who are conscious. For example, there's a neurological disorder called blindsight, where people have no conscious perceptions um, of a part of their visual field, and they don't act the same as people who are conscious. So wouldn't that be evidence that P zombies do not exist?
I don't see why.
Because I mean, people with blind sight aren't conscious of their visual field, and they act differently. They act.
Yeah, but you're just talking about people who have blind sight, right? It doesn't mean that P-zombies would act like people who have blind sight.
Do you think P zombies are incoherent, Derez?
I just find it very, very implausible.
So I guess the idea is that whether or not you can, if you think it's possible, then the idea is that if when it comes to other minds, you're sort of attributing mentality just because it seems that way to you. Like you make inferences as to what your mental states are, or you know what your mental states are, and then you make inferences as to others' experiences. So when someone touches something that's hot and they pull away, you assume that they have a qualitative experience of that. But what you could do is you could just appeal to a disposition. You can say, no, when this set of neurons reacts with when these skin receptors touch this temperature or whatever, they're disposed to react in a certain way. So the idea is that you can just appeal to any sort of mechanistic account as far as other minds go to explain any single behavior, right?
Yeah, but I mean, I think just P zombies. A disbelief in P zombies is just the default position because it seems so implausible that P zombies exist that you'd have to give positive evidence for me to hold to the position that they actually do exist.
The objection is that there can't be evidence for or against, right? When he says it's a basic belief, he's saying that there's no observation that you could use to glean the inference that P zombies or that person X is a P zombie and person Y is not a P zombie.
Right, but then you'd have to give some kind of logical argument why person X is a P zombie and person Y isn't a P zombie, or why P zombies.
I'm saying there's no argument that can be given. It's just an assumption, and either people share the same assumptions or they don't. In which case, there's really nothing that can settle the dispute.
Well, I share the assumption that P zombies don't exist.
Yeah, I'm just saying if you met somebody who said everybody except you and me is a P zombie, right? There'd be no way to settle that dispute.
Would you say that it's a reasonable assumption to make that P zombies don't exist?
Yeah, I'd also say it's a reasonable assumption to say that they do exist.
So it's essentially it's sort of like a leap of faith that you just need to take on like whatever worldview you subscribe to.
Exactly.
So one of us could be a pea zombie right now, and we just wouldn't know it.
Like,
That's right.
Well, I think that wouldn't you know that you aren't a pea zombie?
Yes, you would know. You would know if somebody attributed pea zombiehood to you. You would know that they were mistaken. But we wouldn't be able to know that. Wouldn't be able to know that about a third party. Only they would know.
It's
So,
so it's sort of like Cartesian skepticism. You can't deny the existence of your own mind, but you can deny the existence of everything else.
No, it's different from Cartesian skepticism because I'm not saying it's possible to doubt away the external world. I'm only saying it's possible to doubt away the existence of the external mind. Yeah.
I see.
interesting. So one thing I was always curious about, couldn't the physicalists just make the appeal that the mind does exist on an irreducible level or on an emergent level? So, for example, water. Water is made up of 2 parts hydrogen. Water is made up of hydrogen and oxygen, and both oxygen and hydrogen are flammable. But when they are together in the form of or stasis of water, water is non-flammable. Why couldn't mental properties exist on a holistic level of the mind, of the brain, or neural operations?
That's an interesting thing that I'm going to need some time to think about.
Somebody joined.
sorry, Epicurus, could you just repeat, like, your basic argument? Why can the mind exist
On an emergent level, or even on an emergent level. So, for example, water is composed of hydrogen and oxygen. Hydrogen and oxygen on their own, on the atomic level, are and by the way, if I make a horrible mistake in chemistry, forgive me. I'm scientifically retarded.
That's okay. Everyone is, except for scientists.
Or people who have that university background. But in any case, so water and hydrogen, hydrogen and oxygen are not flammable. Yet at the same time, water is break.
I think what you meant is...
Water is not flammable, hydrogen and oxygen are flammable. When hydrogen and oxygen combine into water, of course, a new property emerges, non-flammability.
Yeah, but that's not a new property. That's just a non-property.
It's a property. It's just an aspect it has. It's resistant to being inflamed.
The objection I think I would render about something like that would be experiential sort of argument, right? There would when we're appealing to emergence, we're appealing to sets of experiences, right? So we're not really appealing to properties that something has intrinsically. We're appealing to properties that we have. Like when we know what something means to be flammable, we know what something means to be wet, right? And so you're not sort of getting out of the dilemma by using experiential predicates to resolve the dilemma, which is whether or not experience can be emergent, right? Because emergent is something that we would call something that comes from experience, right? Causality and time and things like that are needed for emergence. So and the question is that if causality and time aren't sort of experiential, like what are they? What are they? The person would have to explain what they're talking about, right? Because I wouldn't know what that would mean.
So the way I would personally respond to that would be that you have hydrogen covalently bound to oxygen, and everything, like all of the properties of water, can be deduced from the properties of the hydrogen, the oxygen, and the covalent bonding. Water is non-flammable because there's a covalent bond between hydrogen and oxygen, and you can deduce every single property of water from these basic properties.
Yeah, the point is you just described the process. The point is it emerges on a higher level.
Yeah, it emerges, but it's reducible to more basic properties as opposed to the mind, where qualia cannot be explained in terms of like action potentials or synapses firing.
Well, it can be it can be explained as being reductive to the other properties, but it can be explained in terms of the holistic operation of all the properties all the parts working in tandem. But before I continue, we have two new joiners. One is Hugh Jedit, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, and one is Zach Zenz of the Infallible Theist channel. We're just going over positions on philosophy of mind. Would you guys care to share your positions on philosophy of mind and even your religious and or lack thereof positions?
Huge idiot is Reyes from the Skype group, Eddie. He doesn't have a mic.
Oh, I see. So I guess he'll just be sitting in then. And Zach?
Does he have a mic?
Zach, do you have a mic? And are you there? And if so, please either speak or type in the group chat.
He's probably going to the bathroom.
Maybe it's a pea zombie.
Probably. That's the only logical conclusion.
No, actually, what he could be is somebody that's locked in, right? Somebody in a locked-in state. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, it's a function of the part of the medulla, right?
Yes. So he actually has qualitative states and intentional states, but there's no behavioral evidence.
Well, that's not
for it.
technically true because they can move their eyes. They still
Well,
have,
I'm not sure it's true of all. I'm not sure that's true of all locked-in states, but
it is.
but
They,
you could
st-
imagine.
they still have oculomotor function.
But you could imagine a being who didn't have that, right? Who could still have qualitative states, but was unable to move his body.
Well, you're talking about a disorder because in locked-in state, usually they can still move their eyes. So I guess you're talking about a hypothetical locked-in state.
All right.
It's kind of like the reverse. It's kind of like the reverse of a pea zombie.
You're kind of talking about something like a vegetative state.
Yeah, but except that the person is fully conscious, has thoughts and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Yeah, it does sound pretty bad. Sorry, just.
Well, it's especially bad, Josh, when you're undergoing surgery that you're supposed to be anesthetized for, and you can't scream out and say, "I'm awake."
Oh yeah, that's horrible. I've heard
Yeah.
that.
That's apparently happened.
Yeah,
So
it's happened a few
that's
times.
very alarming.
It apparently happens in about 1 in 10,000 surgeries.
Yeah. So let's hope you're not one of those, Josh.
All right, cool. Well, since we've talked about physicalism and perhaps other people here don't hold to it or observe to it, let's go to the completely other end of the spectrum and discuss idealism.
This is gonna be fun.
Yeah,
Wait,
so
is anyone other than Annie an idealist here?
Jura says he
Oh yeah.
gives it some credence, but he's more lenient to substance dualism. Annie, would you like to explain the position?
Huh? Oh. Alright, basically, everything is mental. There's the mind and its properties. And, the properties of the mind can be called like ideas, essentially. And matter is just a conscious experience rather than being objectively out there, beyond your perception.
So intentional states are all that exist.
Sort of, yeah.
All right. So does that? Would that render a small p form of Platonism also incorrect? Do you think that it's incompatible with a Platonistic conception of reality, where abstract objects have their own existence?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't hold to Platonism.
All right, cool. Now, if I were to ask the whole floor what kind of objections they might have, would you be down for answering them as to the best of your ability?
Sure, yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyone have some problems with idealism? I believe some of us mentioned that one or two of us mentioned that it was incoherent in some sense. But
That's
anyone?
probably it's probably Yoda.
Yoda. Although Jack also said he doesn't really comprehend it. So, would any of you like to levy your incredulity? Or why do you think that the notion is contradictory?
Well, I think that idealism is based on a misunderstanding, right? So, take for instance the basic issue of skepticism as discussed by G. Moore, right? Now, G. Moore said something like, well, there's a skeptical objection that could be posed to me where it's saying you don't really have hands, you just think that you have hands, right? And Moore wants to say, well, I'm more confident of the fact that I am, right, than I am of any premise in your skeptical argument, and so therefore I reject your argument. And so he thinks that he can defeat skepticism that way, right? My contention is that both the Moorian and the skeptic are actually confused and misunderstanding the dialectic there. The basic issue is that it really doesn't mean anything to have hands other than to have hand experiences. So it's not as though you could be wrong about that, right? Because you can't be wrong about what experiences you're having. Now, what you could be wrong about are things like certain inferences you draw from what assumptions you have about what hands are, right? So, for instance, you might think that hands are the kinds of things that are solid and don't go through tables, right? And then if you find yourself putting your hand through a table, you have to revise something in your total set of beliefs. One revision you might make is to think that nature is uniform in the way that you had previously imagined, right? So the skeptic might then be able to pose to you a uniformity of nature skepticism, right? So you can reduce this kind of skepticism about hands to a uniformity of nature skepticism, right? But that's a very different issue from whether you have hands or not. And you can translate this same argument about hands to any of the standard global skeptical arguments, right? Such as that you're really in a dream, or you're really in a vat or in the Matrix, or that the universe was created 5 minutes ago and your memories were just implanted in you, and so forth. All those kinds of standard scenarios, right? Which is basically the Cartesian type of skepticism, right? And what I'm saying is that Cartesian skepticism isn't really coherent because there isn't actually any distinction between thinking the world exists and it not existing, and thinking the world exists and it actually existing. What actually distinguishes those scenarios are things like whether the beings that populate your world have their minds, or whether laws of nature are regular or not, right? So you can have uniformity of nature skepticism, and you can have other mind skepticism, but you can't actually have external world skepticism. Because external world skepticism, as distinguished from other mind skepticism and uniformity of nature skepticism, is actually indistinguishable from external world realism. So, given that that's the case, right, it seems to me that idealism ultimately makes no sense. It's not even a coherent thesis, right? Because it's essentially saying all that exists is in your mind, right? If we take away the all minds issue and the regularity of nature issue, you have a thesis which is indistinguishable from materialism. I'm sorry, not materialism. From you know, some metaphysics which would have both mind and matter in it, right? So my question is basically a semantic one, right? What are you even asserting when you say there's no matter there, right? That it's really just, it's essentially the same question is, what are you asserting when you say there are no hands there, right? Even though there appear to be hands. So no, I'm actually an externalist content, Josh. That's actually why I'm rejecting. That's why I'm actually rejecting the coherence of Christian skepticism. I don't really think. Oh, okay, about knowledge. So, so the real issue then is that all that it really means to make a distinction between the mental and the physical, right, which I take to be equivalent to the notion that there's an external world, is that there's a distinction between experiences we have that are intended by us versus experiences that merely assail us, right? And given that we cannot help but make that distinction, that there are some experiences we have that we intend versus some that just happen to us, right? We are, by virtue of the fact that things can happen to us that we don't intend, we're acknowledging that there's something external to our minds. And that's essentially all the physical amounts to. That which is beyond our mind, which in some sense explains our experiences. And that's why I don't think idealism is a coherent thesis.
So, Jack, you mentioned that there are experiences that we don't intend, and that's an argument against, or that's evidence against idealism, right?
Yeah.
So, could
it's
your
not really,
unconscious,
it's not evidence, it's sort of,
could your
it's sort
unconscious
of
mind, could your unconscious mind produce events which you did not intend?
Well, see, I'm basically denying that there's such a thing as unconscious mentality, right? So, for instance, there's two types of mental. Basically, it seems to me there's two basic types of mental property, right? Qualitative states and intentional states. Now, I take it that qualitative states are, yeah, well, if Rex were here, it would not even be worth having this discussion. If qualitative states, what I understand qualitative states to be are things that you have immediate acquaintance with. So there's no way to have unconscious qualia, right? What it actually means to have qualitative states is to actually be conscious of them.
Oh, okay.
Right? So there can't be unconscious mentality of that kind. Now, there's a different type of mental state that we could imagine, which is intentional states, which are things like belief desires canonically. And I take it that the correct analysis of what an intentional state is something that is constitutively self-known. So you can't have a belief without knowing that you have that belief, and you can't have desire without knowing that you have that desire, right? So that essentially rules out unconscious mentality. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't unconscious forces that impinge upon your mentality, right? So there's all kinds of things that cause us to have certain experiences or cause us to have certain beliefs or certain desires, right? which we are not conscious of, right? But if once we acknowledge that, we're essentially acknowledging that idealism is false, because we're basically saying there's something external to us, and given that it's not minded, at least as far as we're concerned, it's something physical.
So essentially, your criticism boils down to so your distinction boils down to a semantic one. Well, at least you believe that and hold to and argue that the idealist's distinction is purely a semantic one, and what they mean by experiences and what the physicalists mean by the physical just amounts to the same thing, i.e., the non-mental.
Exactly, or whatever it is that's outside of your experience.
Huh, that's it. That's actually pretty interesting. So, Annie, or Purist, how do you argue against such criticism?
I'm not exactly an idealist, so I'll let Animating Rebel handle that.
I'm not really, to be honest, I'm not really understanding the objection.
The objection is essentially that your distinction between the physical and your distinction between experience and the physical is a semantic one. There is no real distinction.
What I consider to be physical is basically that which has, what we consider to be out there in objective space, basically. And my position would be that there really isn't such thing as an objective space out there, that it's really just a mental construct. So there would still be something out there, but not physical in the sense of ordinarily refer to it.
So you're just saying. So you're saying
that's not really understanding the objection, because what I'm saying is that the way we can make sense of the idea of spatial extension is as something that is found within our experience, right? That's all that spatial extension amounts to, right? It's some kind of model of the phenomenal, right? Well, first of all, it's a condition for the phenomenal, right? Well, it's a condition for spatial experiences, right? Spatiality is a condition, any kind of spatial experience, right? And it's also a model that we make of our experience, right? We posit something like spatial properties as a way of accounting for our experience, right? And so to say that there really is an objective space out there, mind independently, right, doesn't really mean anything. So once you realize that, I'm sorry?
Sorry, I don't see why it wouldn't mean anything, though. I get that it's a model, but I'm not sure what you meant.
Yep. The objection is most aptly raised against materialism, right? He's saying that to say that there exists objective space is sort of a misunderstanding of what you're talking about, because when you're talking about space, you're essentially talking about phenomenal predicates, right? So what does it mean to say there exists this phenomenal predicate without any phenomenological structure, right? It doesn't mean
isn't that an argument for idealism, though?
No, it's an argument for something like transcendental idealism. It's essentially saying that, which I take to be a realist and anti-idealist view, even though it's called a kind of idealist. Right? It's basically saying that that for every predicate of a sensory character, right, of a phenomenal character, things like color or space or time or sound or whatever, it has a dual aspect, right? It has the aspect of how it appears to us and an aspect of how it exists mind independently.
What
right?
about
You can't
introspection?
actually introspection.
Yeah.
Well, when I say phenomenal, I mean qualitative, right? So a table looks red to us, so that's an experiential predicate. So we can call that predicate red 1, right? But when I say the table is red, I'm also talking about it in a way independently of my experience. What I'm saying is it's red 2. Now, what does red 2 mean? Well, it means there's a property external to my mind that, given the way my mind is constructed, will experience that property as looking red. It's like a dispositional predicate. And you can imagine a being who's built differently who would look at the same table, right, and would have different experiences. But the same property would explain both experiences. And that's what
Yeah.
I'm calling red subscript 2.
So my question is, you can have qualitative states during introspection, and during introspection, you're basically attempting to experience your own experiences, so, or your own mental states. So how would that fit into your argument?
I'm not exactly sure what you mean by experiencing your own mental states. What it is to have a qualitative state is to actually experience it.
Well, I'm not sure if if experiencing, for example, when you look at something, you have qualitative mental states, but that's not really synonymous to introspection.
Well, I think what I understand introspection to be is trying to figure out, you know, what
It's trying to be
preferences.
conscious of what consciousness is like.
Well, I'm not sure I understand that. I mean, I just take it that what consciousness is in this dimension, right? I'm leaving aside the dimensional aspect, so I'm just talking about the qualitative aspect. Is what its likeness, right? So what its likeness of the table is going to be red. Now, it's true that there's what its likeness about things that are non-sensory in character, right? So there's something that it's like to actually perform the addition operation, right? That's called cognitive phenomenology. So I'll grant that purely intentional content, right, in the mind has a phenomenal character to it. That there's something that it's like to have a belief, there's something that it's like to have a desire, there's something that it's like to perform a mental operation, right? But what I'm saying is that even those things, right, are, on the one hand, have a phenomenal character, which is the qualitative aspect, and have a non-phenomenal character, right?
And what's the non-phenomenal?
Whatever the fact is that explains why you experience it that way. Right? And so that's something that's external to its qualitative dimension.
Did you understand the table example he gave, Therese?
Well, he was speaking pretty fast, so I'm not sure if I understood it completely.
We can.
Well,
I think it
try to
helps.
summarize it.
I think it would be easier if you actually wrote this stuff down.
Well, I think it helps to give a comparison because so like when we look at a table and he says there's this qualitative state, red one, which is, so we sort of label it, and then he says there's this reason that it appears to us in such a way, right? So we call that a property red 2, which is the reason that when we come into contact with this thing, we experience it as red 1. But what he's saying is that there could be some agent who's constituted in a different way, such that when they come into contact with red 2, they're actually seeing what you would call yellow 1 or something. So the same sort of property can interact with different individuals differently, but it's still explaining how it sort of how it appears to the individual. So so like when we have this distinction between red 1 and red 2, well, red 1 is what we're talking about, what it looks like just for us, right? So when you look at the table, you say that's a red table. You're appealing to a property of your phenomenology, and then when you say, well, then you posit red 2 and say, well, there's a reason that I don't just have some random experience. There's a reason that every time I look at this table, it's red. And so you posit a property and you call this property red 2. Well, the same red 2 property could explain someone else's viewing their idea of yellow 1, right?
Just out of, maybe if I could give another example. So maybe with the particulars and universals. Triangles, you can imagine, when I say the word triangle, there are plenty of images that come to mind: an isosceles, an acute, equilateral, so on and so forth.
An equilateral triangle is what comes to my head.
Okay, so everyone's got an image of, an image of a triangle. However, all these things would have a universal property of triangularity, namely that they have 3 sides and 3 angles.
Mm-hmm.
Now, for one person to say that such a thing is a triangle, they would posit that universal among all triangles, that it's 3-sided and has 3 angles.
Okay.
Would that kind of be an example that could go along those lines? Because we all have that experience of a triangle, namely seeing all those, but we can make the appeal to set of property or set of properties to say that that's why it is essentially a triangle.
I think I'm going to go back to the color thing, and I'm going to try and explain it in English terms. So I'm colorblind. That's actually a true statement. And what my parents have taught me is that since the way the cones work in my eyes, what I can, like for instance, when I look at my catechism, I see golden letters, but the sort of the color that I see and I identify as golden might be different from, might look differently through someone else's eyes. Is that essentially what the whole color thing is supposed to mean?
Yeah, I'm saying that the same property explains your color experiences and the color experiences of somebody who's not colorblind, right?
Uh-huh.
So what we're talking about whenever we use any kind of sensory predicate, that predicate is going to have a dual character. On one hand, it's going to refer to our phenomenology, and on the other hand, it's going to refer to the same property as it exists independently of any phenomenology, right?
Yeah,
As it
so
exists.
So I think the objection is that might not hold for introspection or for somebody who is blind or deaf, who is generally blind, deaf, and has no sensory experience. The only thing that they're experiencing is their mind or biochemical reactions in their mind. How would that argument translate to such a case?
Well, when you say when they have an experience in their mind, right? On the one hand, it has a phenomenal character, right? So any predicate that they use to describe that phenomenology is going to be subscript 1 with respect to its phenomenal aspect, and it's going to have an aspect that explains that phenomenal character, right, independently of its phenomenality. That's going to be its subscript 2 aspect.
How
So
would you know about the subscript 2 aspect?
We don't know about it. It's just a logical. We don't know about it in terms of being able to describe it, right? We don't actually have the predicates to describe those, to describe things as they exist independently of experience, because the predicates that we use to describe the world are all inherently sensory and well, apart from mathematical and logical predicates, the sensory predicates are all inherently subjectivized in the sense that they have built into them as it is experienced by an experiencer, right? So I can't say that a table is mind independently read if what I mean by read is subscript 1, because subscript 1 means read as it appears to an experience. Right? So if I say the table is read as it appears to an experiencer independently of any experiencer, I'm uttering a contradiction. Right? So I can't attribute the property of redness as it appears to an experiencer independently of any experiencer. I can, however, attribute the property of red to. And what that property is whatever property it is that makes it the case that when I'm brought in conjunction with it, right, I experience it as red subscript 1. And other beings made like me will experience it as red subscript 1. Whereas there could be other beings that have different sensory apparatuses that will experience it in some radically different way from me. I might, for instance, have an inverted spectrum and experience it as green. What would be my green subscript 1? But there's no way for me to know that. In the case of the colorblind person, there is a way for me to know it. There is a way for me to know that there's a radical divergence in our experience, because there's actually a behavioral difference that's manifested, which is that I can perceive something that the colorblind person can't really perceive, right? Such as the distinction between red and green, right? I can say those are two colors, whereas the person who has red-green color blindness is going to say, I only see one when looking at a red-green, looking at a surface that's, let's say, both red and green, right? So there's going to be a behavioral difference that's going to allow us to know that they have something different in their phenomenology, right? But a person who had a perfectly inverted spectrum would call what I call red, they would call red as well, but they would experience it with what I call green, right? And there'd be no way for me to know that.
Right, but isn't that an argument against functionalism? How is that relevant to idealism? Like,
It's an
maybe I'm
argument
just...
against functionalism. It is an argument against functionalism, but it's also an argument against idealism, because it's saying you can't do away with the object pole of the subject-object duality, right? And what I take the distinction between materialism and idealism to be is to totalize one side of that duality and say there's really no object, there's just subjectivity, or to say there's really no subjectivity, there's just objectivity, right? And I'm saying you can't do away with one pole and just have the other, right?
If I could just cut in and interrupt. I'm going to close this hangout down in 20 minutes because I got a showing of the room to get to at 7. But maybe for the last 20 minutes we could discuss, I could either suggest another topic, which is substance dualism interaction, or where we could discuss whether or not that's possible, or we could just, I could just toss it up for suggestions. Anyone got a suggestion?
I think we should do the interaction.
I just want to hear Eddie before. What was it you said you have to go to?
The Room.
Oh, is that a horror movie or something?
No, it's actually one of the worst ever. It's about so Tommy Wiseau is a director, and he makes he made this really terrible movie called The Room, and it's
Oh yeah.
horrible.
Oh, and people just go to it because it's really bad. Like they
Yeah.
really enjoy it because it's so bad. Yeah, I heard about that. Yeah.
Sort of like
Exactly.
Sharknado.
Right.
Yes, but Sharknado was bad on a huge Hollywood budget level. This guy managed to do it with what appears to be a camcorder and 3 days of shooting. Sure. Plus, you could actually throw popcorn at the movie screen.
Oh, that's cool. I wish I could do that in like normal movies.
All right. Anybody have a suggestion for the next topic to round things up, or is everyone just happy to talk about the interactionist problem?
I kind of want to do the interaction problem.
Epicurus, could
Yeah.
we take some time to also discuss hylomorphism? Because I've been wanting to ask you some stuff about that.
Yeah, sure. All right. 10 minutes of dualism and 10 minutes of hylomorphism. All right. So, Dira, since you're this company's substance dualist, why don't you talk about how the interactionist problem is not really a problem, or how you kind of get yourself around it?
Well, basically every formulation I've heard of the interaction problem, it didn't seem plausible to me to accept that two substances must share properties in order to interact. I don't see why that's the case.
All right.
And I see, and the standard argument I've seen against it is that we cannot conceive of how two substances may interact, therefore it's not possible. But I think that's an argument from ignorance. So that's my view on it.
Incredulity.
All right. Would anyone like to formulate their viewpoint on why they can't interact?
Mine.
All right.
I think the main problem is that consciousness, or what we consider to be the mind or something, it's not spatial, right? Because we usually define matter as that which has spatial extension, but then you have this mind interacting with it, which is not located anywhere in the space, right? It's spaceless. And it just seems incoherent as how the two are supposed to causally, connect or whatever, given they're like two distinct locations.
I don't think it seems incoherent. I think it seems I'm not able to explain how they interact, but I don't think that necessarily means they don't. I see that as an argument from ignorance.
All right.
Well, how do you know they do interact?
How do I do? What evidence do I have?
Yeah.
Well, what makes you think that the non-physical substance can interact with the brain or whatever?
Well, basically, my evidence is that every other theory of mind is completely incoherent, and the interaction problem, I see that as an argument from ignorance. So, if every other theory of mind is incoherent,
well,
to me,
couldn't it be that
dualism.
philosophy of mind actually works?
Sorry, what?
I don't see how if the other views don't work, that means yours does. It could be that we have no working model.
I see substance dualism as the most plausible.
But
Okay.
I think that we can't postulate something is true just because we're low on options, and it's an argument. Well, technically, it's only an argument from ignorance, because we can't really say something. We can't really just make up something which has no basis whatsoever, except for the fact that we've pulled it out of our rear, and say that this is a valid idea.
You can't really say it has no basis whatsoever. There's a lot of scientific evidence to show that. I think there's a lot of scientific evidence to show that the mind is immaterial.
All right. Maybe if I could just posit some kind of objection in terms of the interactionist problem. Considering that the interactionist problem would have to focus on two substances that are fundamentally different, but they're at the same time supposed to be the most durable, the most or least susceptible to change. Yet at the same time, they're also both supposed to be. Yet at the same time, they're both supposed to affect one another. I don't really see how the I don't really see how you could claim on one hand one is more malleable than the other, enough to affect it, but at the same time, they're both the same durable substance.
Why would you say that they're both have the same durability? Couldn't you just say one is more persistent than the other? Why would they have to be?
So on regular monism, we're just saying one of the substances is fundamental, namely either the physical or the mental. However, on dualism, we're saying that both of them are as fundamental as one another. If you're saying that both of them are as fundamental as one another, and yet one of them is more susceptible to being to change than the other, then you're not really saying that one is fundamental.
Sorry, I kind of missed that. I'm saying that they're both equally durable.
You're saying that, well, dualism, as I understand it, means to show that there are two fundamental substances in reality, the mental and the physical.
But that doesn't mean they're equally durable.
Doesn't?
As far as I understand it. maybe I misunderstood something.
All right.
Hey, Derez, do you think it's possible for something to be, for, like, say the mind is immaterial but not be its own separate fundamental substance from matter?
That's what Chalmers argues. Sorry, he doesn't argue that the mind is immaterial. He argues that it's an immaterial property, but it's a physical substance. It can be an immaterial property, but I'm not sure if that.
Chalmers is somewhat of a functionalist about intentionality, I believe.
All right. Since we're going to round up the next 12 minutes, since I think that's about all we can get out of the way here, you want to spend the next 12 minutes talking about hylomorphism?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So.
Hold on. Does anybody have the link to what channel this is on? Because it's on.
This is on my channel, but it's private now. It's not a live recording. There are no viewers right now. It's going to be recorded and posted. If you like, I could even just not post it, keep it private, give you a private link, and you could download it on your channel if you prefer. If you'd much prefer it.
Okay.
So wait, did you say you're recording this or not?
I'm recording this.
Recording.
Okay.
It's not live. There's a difference. It's being pre-recorded and distributed later. All right.
So actually, let me just go back and answer Will's question. He was saying that he was asking me for evidence for substance dualism, and I think there's a lot of scientific evidence. If you watched IP's videos, he talks about a study which deals with visual perception, and basically there is no area in the brain to account for subjective experience of visual binding. I don't know. I don't know. Will.
I don't see how there can be evidence for substance dualism. It's a metaphysical claim. I don't understand how there could be evidence for it one way or another.
Let's suppose there is one subjective experience we have, and we map the brain completely, and there's no area which could potentially produce that subjective experience. Don't you think that would be evidence of substance dualism?
You're not saying what the observation is. That would be evidence. You're just saying, suppose that there's no area that could account for it. What would be the evidence that there could be no area that could account for it?
Well, we could, for example, study stroke patients with an MRI, and we could map functional impairments in stroke patients. For example, let's say somebody has an infarction of a part of the visual system, for example, in the visual cortex, and we can map the functional impairments which are produced by that specific type of brain function. So, and that way we can map the entire visual cortex and its function. And suppose we map the entire visual cortex and we found that there's no area which could account for a subjective experience.
But that would just mean that what we were able to map wasn't able to account for it.
Well, what's the difference?
It just means we don't have an explanation for it.
Yeah.
No, it doesn't mean we don't have an explanation. It just if we can potentially study the function of the brain through MRI imaging or through fMRIs or EEGs or so we could determine every single function of a specific area of the brain.
How would it show that some part of it is material?
Sorry, what?
I'm not seeing how that would show that there was something immaterial.
Well, suppose after mapping the brain, we find that no area in the brain produces a specific subjective experience. So, wouldn't that be evidence that that subjective experience is immaterial?
It would just show that we don't have any. We don't actually know what part of the brain might actually account for subjective experience.
This seems to be getting
I think
into.
the question he's raising, Jack, is that let's say we know everything we can know about the brain, yet there's still some subjective experience that is unaccounted for that you can.
Yeah, that's the point I was raising.
Yeah,
and we can know.
The hypothesis we haven't done a complete physical mapping, and the hypothesis that there's something non-physical there would generate the same expectation. You can have evidence for one over the other.
But we can do a complete physical mapping of the brain.
Only as far as we know.
For substance dualism, it has to generate specific predictions.
It does generate specific predictions. Specifically, it generates the prediction that if we do a complete physical mapping of the brain, and
no. If we do a complete physical mapping, depends on what would be the evidence that we've done a complete physical mapping, right? So you need to give an example of an observation that would establish that we know everything about the brain physically. I can't imagine what kind of observation could ever show that.
What kind of observation? For example, MRIs, EEGs?
No, that would just show that we are able to draw, able to give an account for some functions, right? But that would show that there wasn't some. That wouldn't show there wasn't some physical dimension of the brain that we haven't mapped, right? Which could account for functions that you claim are to be explained immaterially.
What do you mean physical dimension of the brain, like an extra?
We have certain physical tools that we use in the sciences to study the physical properties of entities, right? But how do we know that we've exhausted all the physical properties?
We can know that from neurophysiology.
No, because there might be physical properties that we don't have the tools yet to study, and we wouldn't even know we're there.
Wouldn't those physical properties be detectable on at least some kind of imaging, like CAT scan, MRI, or
it might be detectable, but not by instruments we have yet.
Yeah, exactly.
Isn't that kind of a gaps argument?
You're doing the same thing.
Wait, is this actually on hylomorphism?
No, it's not. I believe Perez wanted to give scientific evidence for substance dualism, and
Oh,
Jack,
so we're back on dualism again.
and Jack is arguing that in principle that's not possible because
Oh, I remember.
there wasn't.
Sorry, I have not been paying attention for like the past 5 minutes.
Yeah, so Jack is essentially saying that
It's all going to be recorded, so you can play back the 5 minutes that you were
Yeah.
zoning out.
And the point, and Jack said no because it's a descriptive claim of what's going on. It's not actually prescribing anything.
Oh, I see.
At least I think that was your counterpoint. I think I might have missed something there.
I'm just saying there's no way for us to know that we've ever had an exhaustive physical description. Right? All we can do is construct a physical hypothesis which generates specific predictions, right, and then see if they're met or not. Right? If those predictions are met, that's confirmation of the physical hypothesis. Right? But if we have something that remains unexplained, we can't infer to anything unless that hypothesis generates specific predictions of what we should see given the hypothesis, right? And so given that we don't have a hypothesis that generates specific expectations in the case of the unknown physical properties as well as the unknown non-physical properties, right, there's no way we can have evidence for either of those.
So basically what you're just saying is that anything immaterial has no explanatory power, ever.
It only has explanatory power, generates specific expectations.
Yeah, but you're saying that prediction that it generates is not actually a prediction.
You haven't given us the prediction that it generates. You're just saying that if we don't have a physical mechanism that accounts for it, we can therefore assume that it's non-physical, right? That's just a faulty inference. That's an argument from ignorance, right? If your hypothesis of an immaterial mind generated some specific expectation that could allow us to distinguish it from any physical hypothesis, then there could be evidence for it.
Is there a conceptual example that you could give for a hypothesis that an immaterial mind might generate, or like a prediction that the hypothesis of a near material mind might generate? Because what if he wants to say that, okay, it's like the predictions of the hypothesis of an immaterial mind make have just been not met or whatever. So predict that if you have some mental state or some mental state X, you'll have some brain state Y. If you have, and it's shown that people have X, but that they don't have Y, then wouldn't that mean that that position is sort of vindicated?
Yeah, but he's saying that even if you did that, you'd never know because you could never know in principle that you could completely physically map. If you completely physically map the brain, there could always be some hypothesis, some physical hypothesis that you didn't think of. At least that's what I think he was saying.
Well, what I'm saying is that unless the mind hypothesis makes a specific prediction, right, there's no argument from the fact that we don't have a physical mechanism to account for some unexplained fact. We can't say, oh, we don't have a physical mechanism to explain this, therefore we should appeal to a non-physical mechanism to explain this, right? What you need is a non-physical mechanism hypothesized that gives you specific predictions of what exactly you should see, not the mere fact that we have an absence of physical mechanisms to explain any unexplained fact.
All right, it's 6:30 now. I said I would end the hangout right now, so I'll stick to my word on that. Granted, I know we didn't really talk about mine as it relates to Christianity, but I actually did enjoy how it turned out. I'm just going to stop the broadcast. Anyone who wants to stay and do some post broadcast discussion, feel free. If you guys want to start your own hangout somewhere else, if anyone plans to do it, please say no. So actually, wait, it's being recorded. No one's going to check this and then go to the other one. So there's no point. Okay, cool. I'll just end it. See ya.